When I was a kid, I lived in the basement of a house in Colorado, and it had a ceiling that was unfinished. So you could see the floor joists down there, and you're laying in bed at night. And eventually, it occurred to me that if I stood up on my bed, I could reach over the wall and back into these floor joist caves up above there. Well, eventually, my friend Adam comes over and we're playing G.I. Joe guys. And I'm like, oh, you know what? We could just put the guys up there. And so we did. We put guns and vehicles and guys up there, and it became part of what we did as kids, playing with toys and stuff. Well, you fast forward a while, and yeah, I go to college. We move away. Eventually, I become an adult. My mom sells the toys at a garage sale or who knows what, and that's fine. It was probably time for them to go. But then sometime later in adulthood, I started thinking, I really miss having a few trinkets, a few things that connect me to my childhood, which was a beautiful childhood. And well, one day I'm driving by that exact house with my buddy Adam in the passenger seat, and there's somebody out front. I'm like, I'm just going to ask if they'll let me go through the house. And the guy seemed really reasonable. He was like, yeah, it doesn't seem that weird. Come on. We went through the house and it was cool. And then we got down to my room. I looked up there. I was like, oh, yeah, that's right. It had this weird ceiling. Oh, yeah, that's right. We hid toys up there. And then I asked out loud, like, hey, would it be okay if I got up on a chair and just reached back in there? We used to put toys up in there, and I wonder if any maybe got pushed back further than I could reach with my little kid arms, and maybe now my still relatively stumpy adult arms could find it. The guy was like, that's weird, but fine. And so I go fumbling around in there, and obviously I wouldn't be telling you the story if I didn't find something, but I did find something. And this one, at least for sure, is original. Like that I reached in there and felt and pulled out. I think there was like a visionary and a transformer or something in there too. But this was a really significant find for me in terms of the history of my life, because the oldest item that I possessed in terms of a toy or whatever that related to me was maybe like 10 years old at that time. It was from the time I went to college. But when I found this, the oldest item that I owned jumped back like 10 more years in the history of me. And that was amazing. It's a huge leap in terms of reconnecting with something from the very far back past. Likewise, when we talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls, the biggest reason that this is a hugely significant discovery is that a big percentage of what's in the Dead Sea Scrolls is Bible, Old Testament, Jewish scriptures to be specific. And at the time of the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the 1940s, the oldest stuff we had from the Old Testament dated to the late 900s AD. Now, the Old Testament, depending on who you talk to, was written from somewhere around 1400-ish BC up through 500-ish, 450-ish BC. Now, some people would put it a little bit later, but that's still a huge time gap between the original moment where all of these things are happening and in the 1940s, what our oldest or closest document was in relation to that. And so when some kid reaches back into the Dead Sea Scrolls, into the metaphorical floor joist wall cave, and he pulls out this ancient set of documents, it changes everything. Because not only does that get us much closer in terms of history to where we were at, it also lets us start asking questions about how well the text of the Old Testament has been preserved. So, first of all, the Dead Sea Scrolls matter because archaeologically it's a huge leap back in history, closer to the original thing. And by huge, I mean like half the distance. That just doesn't happen very often. So that's amazing. But second, as you heard me just driving at, it vindicates the Bible. As we talked about in the What's in It video last time around, all the books of the Old Testament, that is the Protestant canon of the Old Testament, the Jewish canon of Scripture, are present except for Esther. You could debate Nehemiah a little bit. We don't need to nuance that all out again. Esther is definitely not there, and there seem to be good reasons for that. So one, it's pretty vindicating for the Bible as we have it now because it says what we think of as Bible now is what they thought of as Bible back then, or at least this group of Jewish thinkers thought of as Bible around the time of Christ, a little before the time of Christ. Now, obviously, there are different Christian groups, different Greek Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, different Catholic groups that, well, all Catholics agree on a little different list of Old Testament books, and a couple of those books are represented in the Dead Sea Scrolls as well. But what everybody from all expressions of Christianity, the books everybody would say yeah, that's Bible, and that all Jewish believers would say is Bible for the Jewish religion, that's all there, minus Esther. So it's very vindicating in terms of the raw contents that are there, but it's also important because it's very vindicating in terms of what the documents actually say. Now, in Cave 1, the first one that got discovered, when the kid was throwing rocks back into the cave and he heard the thing break in the 1940s, reaching back into the metaphorical floor joist cave, the first thing that comes out of there, that gets published, is this great scroll of the prophet Isaiah. This is the one that is still on display in the round in Israel when you go and see the Dead Sea Scroll display. This is the one. And it's overwhelmingly complete. We've got a whole lot of Isaiah there. And the thing that is crazy is when you go and compare Dead Sea Scroll Isaiah from before the time of Jesus, it looks a whole lot like Masoretic text scroll of Isaiah or manuscript of Isaiah. Now, the Masoretic text is the version of the Old Testament that we've been working off of for a really, really, really long time. And that's the copy that dated to the 900s AD that was our oldest copy. The Masoretic text is a product of Jewish scholarship and their refining of the scriptures that happened to an extent before the time of Christ and a lot right after the time of Christ. And this text has been reliable. It's one of two sources that we relied on before the Dead Sea Scrolls, the other being the Septuagint. Now, I haven't made a video on the Masoretic text. I will get to that. I have made one on the Septuagint. If you want to know more about it, I'll link that in the description down below. So you've got this Greek version of the Hebrew Old Testament that is the Septuagint, and then you've got the Masoretic text, but now we're introducing a whole other text tradition to the book of Isaiah in the form of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And eventually, a text tradition for every book of the Old Testament except Esther. That is a gigantic deal because very simply, what's the natural question you would ask? Whether you are into any of this or not, come on, do they match? That's what everybody would want to know, right? And the answer is, yeah, shockingly, overwhelmingly, they match. Now, there's a document that I read that dates all the way back to the 1970s, but not much has changed in that amount of time, that says that we're looking at about a 95% accuracy rate between the Great Scroll of the prophet Isaiah and the Isaiah of the Masoretic text that your modern Bibles are based on. And again, I'm nowhere near good enough at Hebrew. I don't have any Hebrew. I don't remember any of it from school, but I'm nowhere near good enough to vet this for myself. But the claim is that most of the points of disagreement are spelling preferences, typographical errors, that effectively there's no theological change in meaning between the Dead Sea Scrolls version of Isaiah and the Masoretic text of Isaiah, which is mind-blowing. Now, think about what was going on 1,100 years ago. But can you name anyone who was alive in, say, the 10th century AD, the 11th century, off the top of your head? I'm not trying to make you feel dumb. Most of us can't, right? It's just a long time ago. To even name a human from that whole century on the whole planet Earth is hard to do. Can you read any languages from the 10th century or the 11th century AD? That's the amount of time before now that we're talking about jumping back from the existing Masoretic text all the way to the Dead Sea Scrolls discovery. I don't know, maybe some of you can, but that would be a pretty unusual skill set too, because language evolves, culture evolves. All of this stuff happens, and you just absolutely would not expect anything that has been transposed from the age of knights in shining armor to now to match. But this does. That's a pretty incredible thing. Now, in fairness to the person who looks at the Bible and says, I don't think it's from God, that doesn't prove that it's from God. You have a point there. But what it does demonstrate is that what we have in front of us now looks a whole lot like, could be argued as nearly identical to what was being read under the same title 2,100, 2,200 years ago. That is amazing. Further, the Dead Sea Scrolls are important because they don't just vindicate the Bible in terms of what's in it and the actual alignment of the text, but further, they clarify the Bible. Now, there are some words in any ancient language that we're just going to forget or not know, You probably know this, but when we're talking about classical studies, and you're looking at the Greek of the New Testament, the Hebrew of the Old Testament, or other ancient documents, if you don't know what a word means in context, you have to go and try to find that word in other contemporary documents. And if you find 5 or 6 samples of that word being used this way or that way, you can kind of triangulate and be like, oh, okay, all right. So what this document means with that word would have to fall within this range of definitions. It's very clarifying. But sometimes you don't get that. And prior to the Dead Sea Scrolls, there were a few words, again, I'm told, that existed in the Old Testament manuscripts that we just weren't totally clear on the meaning. And one example of that is Isaiah chapter 45. I think it's in verse 2. I'm going to look dumb if it's not. It is in verse 2. Starting in verse 1, we're talking about Cyrus the Great, who liberated the Jews when they got conquered by the Persians and allowed them to go back and rule themselves. It says this is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of to subdue the nations before him and to strip kings of their armor, to open doors before him so that gates will not be shut. I will go before you and will level the mountains. I will break down gates of bronze and cut through bars of iron. Now, there's a little note here, if you're using a modern translation, that says verse 2. Dead Sea Scrolls and Septuagint, the meaning of the word in the Masoretic text is uncertain. So, in the Masoretic text, we didn't know they meant mountains. The word mountains gets this note. The Septuagint gives us a little bit more clarity on that, and the Dead Sea Scrolls confirms what we thought we were seeing from the Septuagint. Now, if you translated this, I will go before you and will level the hills, or the high places, or I don't even really know what word it is, just blank space. Does it really change the theological meaning of the passage? Well, no, not really. If you read Isaiah 45, the thrust is pretty clear. But what it does mean is that with the addition of the Great Scroll of the prophet Isaiah and the Dead Sea Scrolls in general, there's all kinds of clarification on words we just didn't have enough to say with certainty what they meant. And if you thumb through here, what you're going to find is Dead Sea Scrolls references all over the book of Isaiah in most modern translations. Now, there's some translations that are like, no, we're just not doing that, and they don't include this, and they depend almost entirely on the Septuagint or the Masoretic, and there are theological reasons that different teams and tribes have for which one they like or which one they don't like. I kind of find them all to be pretty compelling, and it's really cool that the Dead Sea Scrolls lend clarification to the meaning of just a few words here and there in the Old Testament. So, why are the Dead Sea Scrolls important? Well, first of all, just like reaching into the cave and pulling out the G.I. Joe guy, it just jumps us back in time in terms of connectedness and being closer to the original date and gives us something that you could put in your hand. I mean, you'd ruin it and probably powder it into dust just by touching it, but you theoretically could put it in your hand and touch something that gets you very close to the original authorship of stuff that we call Bible. That's huge. Second reason it's important, once again, is because it vindicates the Bible in terms of the raw content. What is in there looks like what is in the Bible now. And third, it's significant because it clarifies the Bible on a few places where words have just faded into history, but gained clarity because of the context of the Dead Sea Scrolls. A fourth reason that the Dead Sea Scrolls are a really big deal is because it's just great archaeology. It's because it's this fascinating, amazing place where fascinating, amazing people were doing fascinating, amazing things, and they saw all of this history come and go around them. Whether we believe that the Essenes were the people who did most of the Qumran writing, or whether, even if we embrace some of the minority theories that this was maybe a different group that was involved, or maybe a few different groups working at different times, no matter how you slice it, we found where they lived. We found the room where they wrote this stuff down. We found out where they went to the bathroom. We figured out where they stashed all of this. Well, where they stashed at least some of it. Who knows what might still be out there to be found. And so what you have is all religion, all Bible, all theological arguments aside, what you have is a people who were lost to history, covered by the sands of time, swept away by the politics and the military goings-ons of the moment, and they just vanish. We have a couple of vague references to their name, but that's it. Well, and then the sands shift a little bit, and the right resources come along, and curiosity is piqued, and all of these great minds with great talents and great resources descend on this place over the course of the last almost 80 years, and they start digging the story back out of the sand. Now think about how many people, how many communities, how many lives filled with relationships and dreams and ambitions and flaws and beliefs and poetry and art and all the stuff that makes you valuable, all the stuff that makes the people you care about valuable, hopefully all the stuff that makes me valuable. Imagine how much of that has been lost to history. How many of these communities and cultures and languages just gone. Now, we can't save them all, but how cool is it that one of those has been dug back up? And then we get to know these people, and they get to have something of a legacy. I don't agree with all the things that they thought. I read all of this. They think certain things, I think certain things. It doesn't matter. The beauty is I met a new group of people because this discovery happened, and you get to do the same. And I think that's absolutely beautiful. The last reason that I think this stuff is important, and there's probably 100 more reasons that people could think of, but it's just that it compels us to ask questions and think. And the joy of discovery or rediscovery is something that is contagious. I think it leaks beyond one discovery or one moment. You sit down and chip away on math homework that you've got, or you work with your kid on their math homework, and you see the everything clicks moment, and it all works, and that joy of discovering how to do a thing, how to figure it out. You build a thing, you assemble a thing, it works. It's fantastic. And that joy of discovery carries over into other things, to relationships, to ideas, to books, to art, to all of this other stuff. And so I think just getting in the habit of unboxing these amazing treasures is something that's really good for the psyche of modern humanity and really good for me. So the Dead Sea Scrolls get called the most important archaeological discovery of the 20th century. And I think that's completely fair. I think maybe it's even a bit of an understatement for reasons both religious and beyond religious. But the biggest thing that I take from this is that this document, whether you believe there's something to it or not, has been incredibly well maintained, incredibly well transmitted. And this document casts a very long shadow, for better, for worse, whatever you believe, over the course of human history. And this discovery sheds a ton of light on what this is, where it came from, how it evolved, or rather didn't evolve. And that raises questions for what you and I might do with it today. Dead Sea Scrolls are awesome and fascinating. I had a blast with this. If you want to learn more about it, I recommend The Complete Dead Sea Scrolls in English by Geza Vermes. I'm really sorry if I just butchered that pronunciation. This has been a really fun companion, and I have powered through all of this over the last few weeks. You might really enjoy doing so as well. Whatever the case, thanks for kicking this stuff around with me, and thanks to everybody who makes it so I get to do this by supporting the program at patreon.com/TMBH. That just means the world, and it frees me up to get to throw my time at ridiculous projects like this. Thank you so much, whether you're somebody who supports the program or not. Thanks for processing this stuff with me. Let's do more of it soon. I'm Matt. This is a 10-Minute Bible Hour. We'll catch you in a bit.